terrible, terrible time. A lot of people hurt. But there was militant, the militant black movement, the Black Panthers. Again, these are names that probably, these are so sort of historical to you, because these entities now, all these guys are in retirement now, all these that were involved in all this. Bobby Seale and names like that, which you probably don't have any cultural context for. But there was a major war, there was a major cultural war going on 40 years ago. And it was initially over the war and the relationship between race and the war. And of course then, as the war wound down, people, it's like, it was just human nature. That we came out of the end of the Vietnam War in '73. Nixon, who has been long out of office since any of you were around. Nixon, of course, was the most controversial figure, probably, domestically anyway, in the last half of the century. He represented everything that was right-wing, and he represented the war. And so when he was finally impeached or chose to leave office, that set things on a different course. And at the same time, though, we had an economy that was starting to, again, once the war, the Vietnam War, was also a huge fuel to the economy. Wars do this. You think, we're spending all this money to fight a war someplace, but where we're actually spending that money is in our own industry. We're taking government money, taxpayer money, and we're using that money to build things or buy things. And most government contracts require that you buy them from the United States. And that was part of this thing about Iraq, where you have the contracts for rebuilding Iraq. And so the controversy was, well, okay, who gets those contracts? Well, based on our conflicts with France and other players, we said, no, you can't be in any of these contracts because you haven't supported us along the way. So it now kind of all starts to begin to bleed up into your time, because the same sorts of issues have happened in the past, and that the cycle of events is now beginning to happen a little bit faster. And you've already seen that. I mean, you all lived through 9/11. You were all aware that was going on. You were, I guess you were all in high school, right? And that was happening. Okay. Certainly, that had to have some effect on your school life and on your perception of the world. Again, it all depends on what filter you're getting that information through. You have parents and you have access to media. And so really, the interesting thing to me is that you all now have your own immediate access to news. There's a newspaper here at the college, 11,000 copies a day. But you also have, all these other news outlets that we didn't have, because we had the big 3 channels. We had ABC, CBS, NBC. That was where news came from. And so you believed that or you didn't, but that it was all the same. It was virtually packaged the same. Now we have diversity of news, which in the past we certainly didn't have. So that has all changed rapidly. And that's a point that's come across all of these conversations, is the rate at which things are changing and how you deal with it. And we have talked to all of these people in their 70s and 80s about, God, you seem like you're in pretty good shape. You don't seem to be terribly stressed by, anything. You're 80 and you're having a good time. And this is really remarkable, because the rate of change that has taken place in their lives has been enormous. They've gone from horses, to cars, and now to airplanes. And they've gone from having no phone to having a phone on a party line, and then having many of these people in their 80s, some of them anyway, have cell phones. And that's been the conversation, you know, all the other classes, they cannot imagine a time when you didn't have a cell phone. Well, you know, how long ago was that, you know? So that rate of change, and that's something that you'll all have to deal with, we'll all have to deal with in our immediate future, because the rate at which things change is dramatic. And this has become so clear from the experience in New Orleans, that, you know, you are accustomed to your life and its structure. And so you can navigate within your structure, no problem, because you know the rules, and you know what you need and what you can have, and you know what you can afford, and all those kinds of things. When the people had all of that infrastructure taken out from them in New Orleans, it reverted back to tribes. I mean, there were tribes immediately formed for survival. That's a very interesting study, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more, just from the cultural anthropological point of view, about what New Orleans has taught us about human behavior, how human we still are, you know, in spite of all of the infrastructure and, you know, the amenities that we're used to. So, what else?
I actually had a question, like going back to
Your name is?
Charlene, yeah, and it's going back to when you were talking about Weld County and stuff.
Yeah.
I've noticed, I'm in 4-H, at least I was,
Yeah.
and I just finished my last year because now I'm too old, but that it's starting to die down a little bit, kids' involvement in agriculture. I know that it used to be a big thing, and it seems like it should still be, just because there's so many more, I guess, shortcuts you can take, because there's so much more technology that's available to help you get things done in a faster, more expedient way. But I've noticed in Larimer County, and we've also through State of Colorado noticed through Weld County, that it's not as prominent anymore as something for families to do. And I just wondering if you had any thoughts on why that would be.
4-H when I was a kid was a backbone of social activity and education. And because you learn things that meant something, you know. We grew sugar beets in competition. You know, all the kids had lambs or chickens or something, you know, that they were part of, that was part of their life and became part of the show when it came to the county fairs. So the things you learned, I mean, were immediate and pragmatic to your life if you lived on a farm. And even when 4-H kind of began to evolve, which I went to the 4-H fair this year to see how, for that exact reason, say, how different is it? Well, there was still, you know, it was more high tech, because now, you know, you have hair dryers for your cattle, and, you know, you have to spend a lot more money to be in 4-H, it looks like to me, you know, to do all the things that 4-H can. Yeah, but you know, I think they've tried to urbanize 4-H to try to keep the membership up and keep it relevant. And so, and here's exactly the point as to what's happened to this college, that the vet school here, right, was principally for large animals, because they wanted to teach people here how to take care of large animals, because that meant something. It was economic importance. You had to keep your cows healthy, keep your horses healthy, and so the large animals. And so over time now, though, the vet school has dramatically changed, because there's not much, first of all, it's really hard work to deal with big animals. It's more dangerous than it is to deal with dogs and cats. And that's where the money is. That 4-H now is probably assimilating, it's kind of following that trend that you know, if you're going to be a vet here, if you're smart, you're going to, you know, just the economic reality is you're going to open a dog and cat vet operation. It's not going to cost you as much capital, because you don't need much big building, and you don't have all these other expenses. And now it's principally women who are in the vet schools, this school. And I think it's, what, 70-some% of the veterinary school here is women. So that is a dramatic change, big change. And so probably, you know, 4-H, I saw rocketry as part of 4-H. everything now, so that the 4-H is trying to branch out, I think, to keep its relevance.
Well, we just got a new fairgrounds and
Yeah, new fairgrounds are
it's
here.
terrible, but it's just hard to keep up with people having not as much of an interest anymore in it, I guess. Just because, especially with Fort Collins, it's starting to get so much bigger and there's so many more developments and it's turning into a larger city than it once was. That
Right.
Larimer County, the farming parts of it are in the small corners like Berthoud and Wellington and
Right.
closer to the mountains than with the more populated areas. And it just seems to be dying down. And we've gotten numbers from the Weld County Fair too, and it seems like Weld County is doing the same thing.
Yeah. The big picture is this, that my uncle, who's 84, tells me, he said, farming in the Front Range is over. So that's it, we're done. He said, because, and he goes through the list. He said, the water now it's too expensive to use water to put it on land to grow crops. When you can sell it or lease it to an urban development, you'll get way more for your water to give it to sell to somebody to run it on a golf course than it is to grow crops. The prices have fallen or held steady. I mean, the wheat farmers tell you that they're not getting no more for wheat now than they got in 1940. So that hasn't held up. Dramatic change, which you all recognize now because of the cost of fuel. Today I paid $3.39 a gallon for diesel fuel. Which was, when I started college, gas was 18 cents in 1966. Okay, and so we on the farm now, it becomes cost prohibitive to do all of those things that we did in the past because fuel is far more expensive, prices are low, capital requirement for farming is enormous, both in terms of land and machinery. Labor is very scarce, skilled labor, because it's the same thing. You have a tractor or a machine that's worth $150,000 or $200,000, and some unskilled operator can do $50,000 worth of damage in no time flat. So the big operators are the only ones who are going to continue farming. And I know, just in conversation with people in the Weld County area, there is great talk about moving out. They're talking about moving east because that's where the only farmland is available. But they have the same water problems because this year, for example, we were told by the state that we could only pump half as much water from our wells as we have always done. And this is because it's in litigation. Water is in constant litigation. There's always a fist fight over water. And so what's happened is that the first and second generation farmers are all now retiring, or their children are of some age where they're going, well, this is just not worth it. The land is worth more for development. The water is always saleable, and there isn't enough return for effort to continue farming. And the bigger picture beyond that is things like we subsidize so much of farming. Sugar, for example, the sugar beet, which we talk about here, is built Weld County. Well, the world sugar price is like 3 cents a pound, anywhere in the world. I think the cost now to produce sugar is about 24 cents in the United States. So the government pays all the difference between that price and the world price in order to keep the sugar beet industry going. So my advice, if you want to understand the cultural context of anything, look at the economics, because that's underlaying everything. There is an economic component to this, and a technological one. And so until somebody comes up with a way to grow food, in this part of the world that doesn't rely on expensive electricity for pumps or fuel, or the cost of seeds are very expensive and machinery is very expensive. So the costs have now driven agriculture pretty much, and I think he's right, that in 20 years we won't see agriculture as we've known it in this part of the world. it'll be niche marketing, like, market gardens, things you can sell, produce probably will continue to go, because that's more intense, kind of growing, but now the ends of the era of the big farms, the wheat fields that you see, and the big fields of crops, I think are soon to be gone.
I have one good question.
Yeah.
Do you think the cattle industry is also out, or do you think it's still a key player in Greeley?
Cattle, Weld County is an actual corn importer. We don't grow enough corn in Colorado in Weld County to feed all the animals that are here. So, and if you think about places like Florida and other places where grass grows year-round, the cattle market is being driven by the consumer because they want grass-fed cattle rather than corn-fed cattle. This is the public perception. Right? And so, if it's just the ground is becoming too expensive for a feedlot. The environmental regulations are obviously, the environment of a feedlot is an absolute direct conflict with any urban use, with any city. You can smell the feedlot from Gilchrist all the way through Greeley part of the time. This will not, in the competition for land and for use, the feedlot's going to lose out. They are eventually going to be forced out because all the other interests are going to trump the cattle industry. So the cattle industry will continue. We're a huge beef consumer, and a pretty good beef exporter. And it's got to be grown somewhere, but it could be grown in Nebraska, probably on ground that's $300 an acre instead of ground here that's $3 a square foot, as it is in this part of the world. Oh, and I'll conclude with this: that I was in a meeting with some real estate people a couple weeks ago, who talked about this neighborhood, talked about the intersection of Highway I-25 and Highway 34. And their projections are that between 15 to 17 years from now, they're not quite sure, but 15 to 17 years from now, that will be the prime intersection of a city that is bigger than Greeley and Loveland and Fort Collins combined. It's going to be a megapolis. It's going to be this enormous city. And as I've said to other classes too, natural disasters such as the hurricane, people became instantly aware of what might happen to them. And this applies to California. And they've told me, right after the hurricane, inquiry from California about land here, people wanting to move from California, who I assume just thought, well, wait a minute, I live on an earthquake fault. Maybe I should get out before the earthquake comes. That is going to drive people here. And so the culture and the content of the population and the economic base is all going to change so quickly. We are, I think you're within 10 miles of probably one of the newest and possibly one of the strongest high-tech areas to compete with Silicon Valley and others, because I think there are so many reasons to come here. This university being one big one, this in Boulder, and the fact that you're not likely. You don't think of being that your whole life is going to be destroyed by a natural disaster living here, do you? Do you have any? You don't think about, a tornado is going to come here and wipe out my neighborhood. Yeah. So, well, thank you all. Thank you very much, and I hope we all got something out of this. I did, and it was very helpful to me.
I'm Chantal McCarthy, and I'm going to talk about the beginning history of Greeley, really quick. The Horace Greeley first said, "Go west, young man, go west," and that's how Greeley really first began, or people how really began to get attracted to it. And then it was also more publicized by Nathan C. Meeker, who gathered bunch of ambitious and very highly moral people to come together, and they started the first Union Colony stock market here, built irrigation ditches, and White Straits newspaper with 1 year colonizing in Greeley. In the early 1900s, they began factories, the sugar factory, starch factory, and they did the Cunner and Empson Canning Company was built. And during this time, the people really began to change. It wasn't just the white Americans, they began to have immigrants of German, Russians, and Japanese who came in to work in the factories as skilled laborers. And then some of the Greeley was known as a squeaky clean city, and it was one of the 2 most pretty places in Colorado, or in the U.S. Had trees along the streets, and it was really nice. It's also a very high moral city. Possibly, also they had the KKK here for a while. They were the doctors, farmers, and businessmen. There were 750 members. This could be partly why Greeley was so squeaky clean. Then in the 1930s, Warren Montfort came in and began an experiment with controlled feeding of cattle and pens, and he began the cattle industry over here in Greeley. He brought Greeley a brand name and a radical smell. After the drought and dust bowls of the 1930s, and the Front Range residents could no longer survive on the water supplies that was already here, and so they had to invest in the Big Thompson project, and it was a high mountain reservoir that would store water and bring it down and supply for residents, agriculture, and industries and businesses over time.
Very good. Okay, who's next? Your name again, please?
Okay, I'm Molly Ringel, and from the 1940s in Greeley, especially during the war, the population came to about 16,000 people, and 5,564 of the men from Greeley were drafted in the war, and this caused the labor shortage, and so Mexican nationals were recruited through the Bracero, or the Strong Arm is what it's called, and they became farm laborers. And then during this time, 2 POW facilities opened in 1943, and the German POWs were stoop laborers in sugar beet, potato, onion, and cabbage fields. And then in 1960, Greeley was known as the state capital of Colorado, and Capital Pack Incorporated was one of the most technologically advanced cattle and lamb slaughtering facilities in the nation. And it was also known as the biggest industrial development in Greeley since 1902 with the sugar factory. And in Montfort, they received $1,800,000 addition to their factory, and this caused the odor. But in response, when people would joke about it, they'd say, that's a small money. So then later in 1980, the Hewlett-Packard purchased land in Greeley, and then ConAgra had acquired Montfort, and then Greeley became known as the agribusiness and high-tech industries of Greeley. So they'd developed much over that time.
Yeah,
So,
and that covers some of the things we talked about today.
Yeah.
Very good.
Gathering and preserving historical information through recorded interview with participants of past events and ways of life. And it's the oldest type of historical inquiry that's used today. And today, though, it's used with video cameras and tape recorders, things like we're doing now. But yeah, that's pretty much how it's defined.
Right, very good. Okay.
I'm Charlene Lucero. I'm doing how it's related, oral history and anthropology related to each other. And considering anthropology as a cultural studies science, and culture is very site-specific, the easiest way to learn, even if only a small portion of the whole, is through listening to someone who has experienced things firsthand. By interviewing and taking an active interest into an individual's past, not to mention someone who has lived so much life and lived through very big, important things, a person has the ability to get a glimpse of a society or a culture or even a life of a world that would otherwise be alien to them. The best thing to do while indulging in this seemingly folkloric learning experience is to record all of the stories told by the interviewed individual so that these bits of information can be shared and saved and enjoyed and taught to generations to come.
Exactly. Okay?
Alright, my name is Brooke Reddick, and I'm going to talk more about how it relates to our course of anthropology. In the class, we learn a lot about different cultures and how everything works in other parts of the country, and a main way we do this is to learn it through oral histories. We've learned things through readings and movies, and just from sharing from other people, from like this interview, how we did it here, and that's about it.
Very good. All right. Yeah, the big point being that now we are in the digital age for oral history. And so we have this enormous opportunity that has not been available in the past, I'm sure. And so by making our information, putting our information out there in the transcribed form, in the word form, then it makes it possible for other people to find specific parts of this information and then obtain the actual history itself. So, like I say, please go out there, get your own, start with your own relatives and get their stories. All right, thank you all.